I'm a baseball guy. And you were a bat boy in the early steel partition days. Was baseball part of your growing up?
Well, I played for the first years of my life, for the first 11 years of my life. I lived in Wheeling, West Virginia.
Mhm.
And for most of that time, I lived across the street from a big playground. And we played two games there primarily. Baseball in different versions, sometimes real baseball, sometimes baseball in which we emulated players and threw a tennis ball against a brick wall as a backstop. And the other was basketball, and there were several basketball courts. So I spent a lot of time in that playground, especially playing those two sports. And now this was a time when parents, at least my parents and the parents of my friends, were comfortable with a child during the summer who would say, thanks for breakfast, I'm going over the playground, be back for lunch, then back to the playground, back in the evening. So the games were not organized. This was before Little League, and so it was just playing without adult supervision, generally speaking, but really a source of wonderful times and wonderful memories and wonderful friendships, as a matter of fact. And it led to an interest in sports generally. In those days, I remember listening to baseball games on a little portable radio tucked under the covers when somebody thought I was sleeping. And because I was living in Wheeling, West Virginia, the broadcasts were from Pittsburgh.
KDKA, I bet.
That's right. And they included fake broadcasts in which the announcer would sit in a studio in Pittsburgh and broadcast an away game. And you've heard this or heard about it. And the game would be described by, I guess, teletype or something. And every once in a while, the teletype would break down. And this has been written about in many places, but I heard it from time to time where the announcer would have the batter fouling off pitch after pitch until obviously the connection was reestablished. But the intersection of playing games, sports, and watching sports has been an important source of pleasure for me.
So who was your go-to guy as a Pirate fan in your early years?
Well, the early years, Ralph Kiner, Wally Westlake were two of the principal stars on the Pirates in those days. And then they continued, Westlake not so much, but Kiner continued until the latter part of the 1950s when the Pirates sort of came into their own for a while. And for a time, the Pirates had a shortstop named Clem Kosherek. Clem Kosherek was a little guy, and I had seen him play. Why? Because he played at least for one season, and maybe more than one, for the legendary Jamestown Falcons. Late lamented Jamestown Falcons, who drew big crowds into that beautiful stadium. And in the post-war period in late 40s and early 50s, it was really an interesting experience to see professional baseball literally up close. Four guys, some of whom would eventually get to the big leagues. Remembering Clem Kosherek, every year, maybe this was before your time, the Detroit Tigers played an exhibition game in Jamestown. And there were two great stars for the Tigers in those days. One with Hal Newhouser.
You want to get this here, Ed? It's wrong. Oh, good. This is going to be good. Go ahead.
And the other was George Kell.
Yep.
But they never came because it was usually during the All-Star break. A guy named Dizzy Trout came, and at the old Jamestown Stadium, you know, the billboards had classic ads, And one of them, I forget if it was a taxi company or something, was upside down, which is a brilliant way, because everybody noticed that an old Dizzy Trout goes out to left field, stands on his head. It was just fabulous. So it was fun for me. I'd never been to a major league game.
Well, two quick things. One, at 1946 is when that exhibition game occurred with the Tigers. It was 1945. I've written a history of the Jamestown, so I'm tuned
Was
in.
there only one year? Was 46 the only? I thought it happened every year.
No.
No?
And so think about it. We're Class D. Class D.
Oh, I know.
And then 1945, the world champions were the Detroit Tigers.
Right, of course. They
So
beat the Cubs.
46, the first year after the war, a guy named John Yackham, who was from South Dayton, came back. He was a purple-hearted guy who
Didn't he
came
end up
back.
owning the Senators?
Pardon?
Didn't he end up owning the Senators or
Yes,
something?
good memory, for a short period of time with Clark Griffith. And so John, young kid, basically bought the team, had so much chutzpah that he convinced for opening day here, Class D, to bring in the commissioner of baseball, Happy Chandler.
No kidding.
You gotta be kidding me. You know, like, to me, I could be a P.T. Barnum, but that's beyond the pale. That same year, John Yackham convinces the world champion 1945 Detroit Tigers, minus their all-stars, which was Greenberg, Newhouser, and Kell, to come here. So everybody else was here playing a Class D team.
So they only came once?
Yeah.
I must have been lucked out. I used to come up in the summers to spend time with my grandparents, aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
And the summer of 46 was the year my sister was born. My one sister's 9 years younger than I am. And so I spent a long time that summer. My uncles were home from the Air Force and the Navy. And in those days, the Falcons were such that they'd at 11 o'clock, they'd wait for the 11 o'clock news to ask, how did the Falcons do with Hornell or Wellsville or Hamilton in those
Huge,
days?
huge.
It was a big deal. But I thought it was every year, so I just lucked out and happened to be
You
there the
hit-
year that they came.
The world champion Detroit Tigers. And it turned out Russ Dietrich, who you may know, Jamestown's Mr. Baseball, and it turned out that his story was that his dad was driving him home from that 46 game, and he had somebody knock on the window, and here was Dizzy Trout, who had finished the game, and was looking for a ride to come back uptown.
No kidding.
Because they were staying at the Hotel Jamestown.
Ha!
So here's a kid, eyes popping out of his head. Here's Paul Dizzy Trout. Of course, who did what he did, everybody, that was a picture, and that was a major.
Right. He was a very good pitcher, by the way.
Very good, oh.
He sort of, I think, not too many people remember Dizzy Trout because Newhouser was such an overwhelming
Yeah.
figure for the Tigers in those days.